Hi everyone, Steven here. Today we're talking about a piece of music that I just released called Summer Sunshine. I'm going to break this video up into a couple sections. The first section is going to talk about what lo-fi is. The second section will talk about the title, Summer Sunshine, and how I tried to make the music sound like the title. We're also going to talk about sound design, and then there's a bunch of small musical stuff that doesn't really fit into either previous categories that I'll talk about at the end. I think that's going to be the most interesting part of the video. We'll talk about form, contrasting elements as we move from one section to the next, more of the details of the chord progression and the drum grooves, and we're going to talk about harmonic complexity, grace notes, and irregular forms. So let's begin. The first thing that we're going to talk about is lo-fi hip-hop, which is the genre that this piece fits into. There's two main categories. We have lo-fi, which means low fidelity, and then we also have hip-hop. So lo-fi is a really interesting phenomenon. It's a modern form of music created on YouTube right around 2010 or so, and it incorporates elements of low-quality music, which can talk about vinyl crackle, hissing and popping, instruments that are not high quality, and it's just a really fascinating genre, especially in today's modern age when everyone is focused on having the most vivid colors, the sharpest pictures, the highest quality audio. To have a genre of music move in an opposite direction of that, I think is really interesting. So for this piece, the way that we included low fidelity elements is we have this vinyl crackle. This is what it sounds like. Ableton has a couple stock vinyl crackles built into the program. I like this one best. It's called Zerr, Z-E-R-R. Here we can control the volume, really loud versus really quiet. You can control the density, just how often the popping happens. So I have it at a pretty low density, but you can turn that up, of course. And then here's just an EQ. I tried to EQ out the low sounds and shape it a little bit so that there's not that much mud in the mix. Although you can tell just by looking at it, the frequencies of this crackle are very specific, right around this 1K range. So this is a very common trick that lo-fi music uses, vinyl crackle being a favorite effect. You could also have other effects like white noise or atmospheric noise, which we'll kind of talk about later. Here at the drums, I'll give a little bit of a sample before we talk about what's going on here. So this drum groove, how did I come up with it? I'm not an expert in hip hop, so I did a lot of listening to lo-fi, to jazz, hip hop, and I came away with a couple lessons learned. The first is that I feel like a lot of hip hop uses closed and open hi-hat. So that's what we got up here. We have our closed hat, which sounds like this. We have our open hat, which sounds like this. Together, they form a pretty standard drum groove. This is just straight eighths with some open hat at the end of the measure to give it a little bit of variety. And it's just a staple of hip-hop grooves. Of course, you can use different cymbals. Like in jazz, you might find more ride cymbal. For swing, for rock, you might have more crash cymbal, stuff like that. But for hip-hop, a lot of it is closed and open hats. In hip-hop, they use drum machines. Drum machines is technology which emulates drums, and you can program it to have a bunch of different patches that occur at regular intervals. And so this really takes the drums away from an acoustic live feeling into something that's more programmed. Instead of trying to emulate acoustic sounds, they went in another direction, which is try to make it sound more electronic, different than acoustic, right? So this is what the snare drum sounds like. This is the most predominant layer, and this gives it that drum machine type feeling. So an obvious electric snare drum sound. That helps with the hip-hop feeling. And then we also have the repetition. When someone's playing an acoustic drum set, as a musician, they might add all these little complexities, different types of fills, which is really great. But when you're coding the drum, as in like a drum machine, you generally pull away from that, which is good for me because I'm a non-drummer. And so having things be more repetitive with less fills is easier to do in the program than to emulate an acoustic drummer with all the fills and complexities. So you'll notice that as we listen through this piece, a lot of it is pretty repetitive. And that helps it to not only fit the hip-hop style, but also to make up for my lack of knowledge in the drum department. The next category is something that I feel applies to most lo-fi hip-hop, but isn't necessarily under lo-fi or hip-hop, and that is that the music is relaxing and atmospheric. So we achieve that in a couple ways. The first way is that the tempo is pretty slow. You see we have 75 BPM up here. It makes it feel less rushed, more laid back, not as much energy, which is good for the relaxing part. The next thing that we did is we made sure that the attacks of the instrument, especially the piano, isn't particularly hard. And this is what it sounds like right now. So a nice soft piano sound. It is the East-West Steinway patch, which is great. And something that I learned over the course of this project is that for this program in particular, the velocity makes a huge difference as to how it sounds. So right now you can see down here our velocity is around 43 to 49, and it gives us a nice soft sound. However, before I learned this, the velocity was somewhere closer to the hundreds here, and you'll be able to tell immediately that it sounds a lot punchier. Even clipping it a little bit there versus what we had. So the velocity doesn't only change the volume of it changes the timbre, it changes the attack of the piano. So really dialing that back helped to make it feel more relaxing. And then the other thing that a lot of lo-fi hip-hop does is on top of stuff like vinyl crackle, a fair number of them will add atmospheric sounds. This could be rain falling, a fire roaring in the background, stepping on leaves, stuff like that. And so I actually put this audio in of birds chirping and the wind and some insect sounds. I captured this audio myself, went out to a nearby park with my recorder and just recorded a couple minutes of sounds. And so this is what that sounds like. And this helps to give more atmospheric stuff to fill up the space. You'll notice that I EQ'd it pretty hard just so that we can mostly capture the bird sounds. You can take a look at that here. It also has a little bit of white noise because of the atmosphere of the forest that I was capturing sound in. And it really helps to add a summer sound to the piece. We can hear bird chirping throughout. A couple things you'll notice is I did split up this audio, and this is just me trying to manipulate the timing of the bird chirping so that it occurs when there is less going on in the song. And the other thing you'll notice is that I do have it across 2 tracks, and that is because when I first recorded the audio, I didn't have a dead cat, which helps to lower the amount of wind hitting the microphone. So unfortunately, a lot of the recording that I did wasn't usable because there was just so much white noise of the wind. So I only had a small amount which I could work with. And so because of that, I looped it over and over again 4 times here. And then this is just me fading in and out. So hopefully it sounds seamless. So let's just take a listen to that transition here. So that's why I have 2 tracks there. The next thing we're going to talk about is the title. The title of the piece is Summer Sunshine, and there were a couple adjectives that I wanted to focus on. The first adjective I wanted to focus on is the word bright, because summer is bright and warm. The second one is light, the opposite of heavy. And then the third is relaxing. And relaxing I really covered under the lo-fi hip-hop stuff, the slow tempo, the soft entrances, the atmospheric stuff. So that's covered. So let's first talk about bright. I was trying to emulate the sound of brightness, and so originally I tried to play around with just major chords to see if I can get the song sounding really bright, but I felt like it lacked something, like it lacked contrast. So what I came to realize is that for it to sound bright, we need to have minor sounds as well so that we have that juxtaposition. And so throughout this whole piece, there's a motif that I have going on in which we take a minor chord and turn it major, and that process of going from minor to major over and over again is what creates a brightening type sound. So the chord progression that I came across is something that looks like this. We have an E flat pedal in the intro and the A section. And on top of that, we have some shifting colors. First, we have E flat major. We have F minor over E flat. We have F major over E flat. And then back down to E flat. So all together we have and then the second time through we resolve it. So specifically this motion from minor to major occurs with that F chord. That adds a nice brightening effect to it, which is great. That's found in the introduction when the A section comes in and the guitar comes in. And it also occurs in the B section. In the B section, we break that pedal and we find ourselves with C minor to C major chords, F minor to F major, G minor to G major, and then C sus to C major. So that sounds something like this. So once again, we have these minor chords that transition to major chords, and it really gives a brightening type effect. The next thing that we're going to talk about is light. What I wanted the piece to sound is light, bouncy. I didn't want it to sound very heavy, so I decided to achieve that effect with a rhythm. First, we'll take a look at the introduction. Throughout the whole piece, there is a large combination of downbeat and upbeat passages. But specifically, we're going to take a look at this left-hand line, and this is what gives it its light feeling. So a combination of downbeats and upbeats. This is something that I really learned from Latin music. If you listen to a lot of Latin music, Latin jazz, the bass player is going to be playing these rhythms that cross the bar lines, cross over downbeats, and it gives a really nice over-the-bar sound. This would feel a lot different if we announced each downbeat. Like, for example, this one measure might sound like this. And announcing the downbeat makes it feel a lot heavier, not as musical. And that's what I was thinking about when I was writing this left-hand part. This motif continues into the B section, where we have the left hand continuing to play frequent upbeats. So that's here, and we'll take a listen to just this, specifically focusing on that left hand here. So a similar motif going on there. And that's something I worked really hard on to make sure that the motifs that are present through the song are really carried through the whole piece. I really worked hard on that for both the brightness as well as this upbeat motif. So let's move on to what I think is the most interesting part. So first, sound design. Because this piece is so simple, when I finished my first draft, I felt like it really needed something. It felt really empty. You'll notice that the instrumentation is very simple. Basically, we only have guitar, piano, drum sets, and then atmospheric sounds. If you wanted to count the atmospheric sounds as a separate sound, so it's 3, 4 at best different instruments. So totally fine. But in order to make sure that it still sounds full, I ended up layering some sounds. So originally, this is what the guitar sounded like. We just had this guitar here. So here we have something that has a lot of attack. You can hear the plucking or the strumming of the strings, but I felt like it kind of lacked some sound in the sustain element. And so I found this guitar here. So you can tell that the attack is a lot quieter. We have a lot of sustain. We have a lot of reverb. So taking these two distinctly different elements and putting them together, I felt covers a lot more space. So here is what they sound like together. A lot better together, right? I did the same thing in the piano. So originally it was just acoustic piano. And similar thing with the guitar. Acoustic piano has a lot of attack as the hammers hit the strings, but not as much in the sustain department. So I found this sound. A lot more sustain, a lot more warmth, a little electronic. And also, just to aid in the effect, I also boosted the high end of the sound so that it has more shimmer on top. And then together, you could tell that it creates a much wider sound, a lot more presence, and some warmth from the combination of acoustic and electronic elements. And then the last thing that I layered was the snare drum. Originally, I only had this electronic snare drum that I was talking about earlier. But like I said, when I got down to that first draft, I was like, wow, it seems thin maybe, And so I found this acoustic snare drum sound, which has lower frequencies to contrast with the electronic snare's high frequencies. This acoustic one sounds like this. And then we combine them, and it sounds a lot better together here. A lot fuller as well. Just trying to find sounds that complement each other. I realized that really trying to pick one sound for one element and another sound for another and mixing them will help cover a lot more space. So often it was matching high with lower frequencies, attack with sustain. Those types of elements together really work well. Okay, let's talk about all the little musical elements that I've picked up over the years. The first is form. You can tell the form just by looking at the color of the main instrument parts. There's a lot of very common forms like AABA. There's all sorts of classical forms like rondo. I ended up with something fairly standard. It's kind of like a palindrome. We have the introduction, we have our A section, our B section, and then it goes the reverse. A, intro, or outro if you want to call it that. So intro, A, B, A, outro. And it has a nice effect to it. We have 3 sections laid out, but it's laid out in a way that we get more out of each section because the intro and the A section repeats. And then the next major thing is contrast. I've worked a lot writing music over the years on creating contrasting elements. Just like the minor-major dichotomy, I feel like major sounds more major when there are minor chords, vice versa. And so usually I add pretty starkly contrasting elements in my pieces. Sometimes it means the A section is swing and then the B section is samba, or one section has very rigid ensemble hits and then the other section is more free. However, when I wanted to work on this piece, I wanted to make sure that it all still felt like lo-fi. I didn't want to add other stylistic feels or anything like that. So I had to be more creative in the way that I created contrast. The first thing that I did is I introduced this pedal in the intro and the A section. We got our... So this E flat pedal is going and going and going, exact same rhythm, same part all the way through here, almost 50 seconds of music. But I knew that at some point I need to break the E flat pedal. I have to go to somewhere else. And that's why I saved it for this B section so that it sounds very sonically different. There's a little bit of a break here. And then immediately we are in C minor. I just thought that would be great, especially because throughout the whole introduction, we don't have any C minor chords. So going to C minor immediately puts it in a different sound, somewhere that we haven't been before. The second way that I introduce difference is I have this little vacuum here. So after the drums come in the second half of the intro, we're playing this pretty consistent pattern all the way through. So I thought to spice it up, we can put a vacuum in there. I don't know if it goes by another musical term, a dropout perhaps, but I'll show you what it sounds like. So just a little bit of space, everything drops out except the melody, and then we come in with a different drum groove. Like I said earlier, a lot of hip hop uses closed and open hi-hats, and that's what's going on here. This closed and open hi-hat goes on for almost 50 seconds here. And then when we get to the B section, it changes. This is a sound that I really like to use. It's called the ride bell. This is what the ride cymbal sounds like here. It's pretty common in jazz swing. You could put it in hip hop too as another color, but one of my favorite drum sounds is the ride bell. Rather than just hitting the ride cymbal like you might any other cymbal, like that, you actually hit the cymbal right on the very top end of it that's connected to the screw here. It has a lot more punch. It's more brassy, more metallic, sharper sounding. And I really love that sound. I probably use it too much, but that's how I changed the general feeling of this drum groove. Something else you'll notice is that the ride bell occurs on the upbeats. Sounds like this. This kind of upbeat pattern is found in a bunch of different types of music. I think of disco when I think of this. Usually the tempo is a lot faster, and instead of ride bell, they use open hi-hat to achieve a similar effect. Using ride bell here is nice. It really changes the sound of what used to be a closed and open hi-hat. It's also a different rhythm. It only occurs on the upbeats rather than a straight eighth type feeling. So it really opens up the groove here. There's a slighter difference going from the introduction to the A section. When I first introduced the drums here, it has a really simple pattern. We just have our snare on 2 and 4. It sounds something like this. we get to the A section here, you can see all of a sudden there's a lot more snare drums. So it's busier. It's still building upon what we had before, but with an increase of snare drum patterns, it has a little bit more energy. And so it contrasts just in that slight way. It sounds like this. So a little bit different. Let's see if I could find it. There's like this one snare to bass drum sound that I found pretty frequently. I think it's just right here. Right here. So that snare drum's on 4, and then the kick comes right after on the upbeat. This is something that I found a lot of hip-hop drum groups include. Especially I was listening to a lot of Robert Glasper, who's one of the most famous hip-hop and jazz fusion artists. And this upbeat kick drum pattern after the snare is pretty iconic, pretty standard. It's something that's used a lot in these types of tracks. So I included that here. The next category we're going to talk about is harmonic complexity. So as a jazz musician, in my pieces, I'm always trying to include chord progressions that I haven't used before. So the first thing that I haven't done yet is putting this pedal and then the minor to major progression on top of that. So specifically this chord progression that we were talking about earlier in the beginning, we have E flat major, F minor, F major over E flat, back to E flat major again. So this isn't something that I've done before. So I think it's cool, especially the left-hand pedal keeps it really grounded, and I do love working on tops of pedals. I think any time when you have one element that is going throughout and everything kind of shifts around it, that's a really cool effect. So you can see here that the pedal is the consistent element, and then the colors are shifting on top of that, and it has a really nice effect. Something else that I really work on is voice leading. Whenever you're writing chord progressions or parts in general, you always want all of your voices to resolve either by half step or whole step. You can tell everything here is moving by half step or whole step. It just makes everything sound a lot smoother. That's kind of what's going on there. And then in the A section, I include another constant element, which is this B flat note here. This is something that Robert Glasper does a lot, where you have one top note that stays consistent while everything shifts underneath it. So we go E flat major, F minor over E flat with a 4 on top. We have F major, it's 4 on top. And then it resolves back down to E flat major. So it's this dissonance right here. As a jazz musician, once you start learning about the different dissonances that can occur, especially on dominant chords, you start craving dissonance. And so I'm always trying to find ways I can sneak dissonant parts in together that still sounds musical and it's still pleasant to hear. And so I couldn't help but sneak this B flat here. A really harsh interval, but the way that I lessened the blow of it is I changed the velocity here. This B flat, the velocity is 28, whereas the note underneath it is 49. So almost half the volume. So it's still there. You can still sense it. It's just not as sharp. And here, I'll play what that sounds like. I love dissonance. I love dissonance. Something else you'll notice is I like counterpoint. I like when lines are doing the opposite thing. I have a little bit of that at the end. We have this top line go B flat, A flat, G, and then the bottom line is going C, D, E flat. So they're moving opposite of each other. I always try to have these little contrapuntal lines, these half step and whole step lines that are moving through chord progressions in interesting ways. And you can tell just by looking at the piano roll, this whole part is moving just by half step and whole step like I was talking about earlier. So that's how I added some harmonic complexity, some harmonic twists to what is a pretty standard chord progression. Just some ways to add a little complexity to something that's so simple. Let's talk about some other stuff. Let's talk about the grace notes in the guitar part. The grace notes are something that I use very often, and it just adds a little bit of spice to something that would otherwise be kind of bland. So let's take a listen to what it sounds like without the grace notes. So not bad, but if we do add the grace notes back in, you'll see it has a lot more character. So much better, right? Let's see, where else did I add grace notes? I know that they're in the B section as well. Had a similar thing going on here. So you can see all these little grace notes. Let's listen to what it sounds like without the grace notes. Verse is so much better. I use grace notes a lot. They just add a little character to the part that would otherwise be pretty bland. One of the last things that I have to talk about is this form in the B section. I don't know if you could tell if you listen to this song, but there's actually an irregular form here. So if we take a look at this, let's go by twos. So this is 2, 4, 6, 8, and then we have just one extra bit right here. And something that one of my professors at university would tell us is not to sanitize the parts that you're creating. So if you think of a melody and it has an extra beat, it's an odd meter, it's an irregular form, it doesn't fit evenly into a grid pattern, that you should keep those because it gives character. And so that's what I did here. There's a functional reason that I added this little extra section as well. When we're going through this chord progression, it used to be in E flat, the intro and the A section are here, right? And then we move to C. This is where the tonic is in the B section. At the very end, we end on this C sus C major. And we could go from C to E flat. However, the more standard approach to get back to a key is to go from its fifth. So in the key of E flat, that would be to get back using a B flat chord. So all I do is we end in C. I repeat it, but I go down a whole step. And then it leads really easily back here. And we found our way home. So without all the pausing, let's hear what it would sound like if we went from C directly to E flat, and then I'll play it again with the B flat chord, and you'll see that it transitions back to that E flat tonality a lot easier. So this is without the transition. Here's with that transition. And then we're back home. Just a little bit of an irregular phrase. And I love when phrases end up like this. I just think it's so cool to have little irregular bits in there. And if you're not really paying attention, you might not even notice it as you're listening to the song. So that is my breakdown of Summer Sunshine. If you've made it this whole way, I really want to say thank you for taking a listen. If you learned something new, give a like, leave a comment about things that you want to hear and things that you want me to talk about next. You can subscribe to the channel. It really helps it out. I'm hoping to post pretty regularly, and currently I am in the process of working on another lo-fi song. I'm hoping that I can finish that one out and release it. I hope to see you in the next one.